He's had an illustrious career, really, in many things. John and I met each other over a decade ago, many years ago, when he had a software technology business that we implemented Great Plains together over there. So we've known each other quite a long time. Many other experiences, but one John is going to speak upon today is his CFO stint at Bluestone, taking a company that was fast-growing consultancy on QuickBooks and a broken Replicon expense system, and how he actually moved them to Intact in the cloud and Nexonia and poised them for sale to Huron Consulting. So he'll tell that story, but many others I'm sure will weave into his talk today. Amy Cooper is with Sim Partners. Amy's had a great career from working with Fortune 1000 companies at Deloitte, some fascinating consulting experiences, to her run as VP of Finance at Grubhub, with starting up a finance department there really from scratch, very early employee, and then saw that through IPO, and then most recently now at another startup gig at Sim Partners. So she's done this rodeo a few times now, and she's got a lot of experiences she's going to share. And then Tanya Yaknis is the Director of Finance and Corporate Controller at Tandem HR. And Tandem is a PEO and HR benefits company locally here in the Chicago area, serving companies around the country. When I first met Tanya about 4.5 years ago, they were on multiple versions of QuickBooks and Peachtree, but a couple dozen different legal entities due to the statutory nature of their business. And literally in 6 weeks, Tanya led the move to Intact in the cloud, moving all those companies off of QuickBooks pretty much single-handedly. We helped along the way, but she did quite a bit of the heavy lifting there. So, and today they've been on the system now over 4 years. So our panelists here will have a lot to say. I do have questions, but I'm hoping that you guys will help, and feel free to make this an interactive session. No curveballs, please. No and I do understand with the baseball theme that we are sitting right in between you guys and going upstairs to the roof for lunch, and hopefully Ariana's opening pitch here, and it looks like the rain might hold off. So we're going to get going with our panel, and feel free to ask questions along the way. We do have only one mic, so I'm just going to pass the mic here. So thank you.
Hi again, my name is John Hudelhoff, and Brian, I actually started on punch cards, so I've got a long tech background. So 6 years in auditing, a lot of process, operational audits, financial audits. 5 years as a corporate controller, doing SEC reporting, and then I said enough of the corporate stuff, enough of the big ERP stuff, I'm going on my own. So 24 years of selling technology solutions to various size companies, very interesting process. So, and then about 4 years ago, I sold out of that business, went to a company called Bluestone, very interesting company. They were a Hyperion implementation firm. If you know anything about Hyperion, big, financial analysis. But the interesting part is they were on QuickBooks and their data disappeared. QuickBooks quit on them, and interestingly enough, Greg Block, who's in the room, had started with Bluestone trying to sell them down the line of Intact. And we had QuickBooks disappear. They were going through an audit. We had Intact purchased but never implemented. We had Replicon, which wasn't good. It was a manual process basically. And we had Salesforce. So I had to, within 2 weeks, recreate data. I had to go in and get the audit done. I had to, because there was a bank line coming due, typical story. So we went through this process, and the great thing about Intact was it was easy to implement, and it was easy to integrate with other solutions. So we integrated with something called Nexonia, if you've ever heard of Nexonia, time and expense. Love Neil. Neil is my hero because he helped me through this process. But we were able to implement and go within 30 days. We were able to recover all the data, start a new system, have a great foundation. We ended up implementing Salesforce into Intact. So what we did is we made everybody's life really easy and really easy to operate. We ended up growing the company from 10 million to 24 million, 50 people to 128 people seamlessly. And the company was purchased because at the time the EPM space was getting rolled up for $30 million cash. We did this transaction because of Intact and the ability to create data in 60 days. We went through 2 audits to make sure the data was right and it was intuitive. You know how you say all the dimensions are there? It was so easy to get through the process. When we went to Huron, I'll never forget this because I didn't want to go back to a big corporation. I said, I'm not going because you guys don't know how to be current in your technology. They use something called Reuters, if you know what Reuters is. So, and it's interesting because what I do is I go help companies currently, and I'm fighting an ERP implementation to get back to the cloud. So I looked at Brian's slide and I said, I need that slide so I can tell this client, don't do this. So very interesting, the process. So the people at Huron said, how do we get your system?
Thanks, John.
Oh, let's see, how do we get here? I think I heard Brian speak about being caught in your subledger mindset and that sort of old ERP system. And I thought, well, I guess I had an advantage. I didn't think of it as an advantage. I joined a finance organization as a chemical engineer with no background in accounting outside of a class at a community college. So we started, I was the 6th employee, we started running QuickBooks and sort of figured it out, hired a person to come in and teach me a little bit about I have an MBA in finance, I know what a P&L looks like, but this is how you start thinking about cash flow and start doing things a little more aligned with GAAP. At that point in time, the company had a top line annually of $50,000, so we were really a little more concerned with making payroll. Very quickly, we grew 10% to 12% every month, month over month for 6 solid years. So very quickly, the company started having a similar problem on QuickBooks, where in 2010, we were sitting there running the program and loading in the orders for the day, and all of a sudden, everything stopped. And I'm like, why is this stopping? Did the power go out? Because again, it's a startup, it could be anything. And at that point, I realized this system is starting to collapse. Lindy, fortunately, had come into our labs right before that, hired a controller with his CPA, which was immensely helpful. And we started rolling out Intact and doing the implementation, and then QuickBooks shut down. So during that implementation, we also re-implemented a new version of QuickBooks just to get the daily order data to be able to load it into Intact at the end of the crossover. So that was a little bit of the way of not to do it as a startup. You want to go a little bit earlier than that. At Sim Partners, we had a very different set of issues. It's a SaaS-based business. Grubhub, you know, is B2C. Primarily, it's B2B2C, really. In SaaS world, revenue recognition is the issue. And what we had there were long, multi-year contracts and a rev rec issue of taking that money across the different accounting reporting periods going forward as we signed those. We were collecting all the money up front, which is great on the cash statement and bad on the P&L. So that process was Excel sheets collapsing. So quickly called Lindy again, and I say that we called Lindy, but let me take a step back. We looked at all systems at both points of decision. All systems being cloud only, so number one preference, and we compared them. And at that point in time, Lindy and Intact really had what we needed. At Grubhub, we needed to integrate the operating system directly into Intact, and your CTO even called our CTO directly and had a long relationship there that's still going on. At Sim, we needed to get the rev rec straightened out to get off that. So it's very different reasons, but landed on the same choice. I also have a personal bias. I think when a tool that you're purchasing came through a genesis of accounting, not a CRM tool, you know you're going to get the product fixes and changes that are based on their primary system, which is accounting. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want a CRM solution refigured for accounting. I wanted accounting. So both implementations, by the way, got done right on time. We had a 90-day implementation at Sim, and it was 90 days because we needed to get to the start of September. I think we probably could have been at 60, frankly, but we wanted to get into the starting of a period. And at Grubhub, even with the ongoing implementation, was on time. So pretty easy to do, relatively speaking. Both systems are still up and running. Both have gotten more complex with add-on features and Grubhub Case International consolidations and everything, and we've been very happy with the products.
My name is Tanya, as Lindy mentioned, and our story, we've been in tech for, I'm thinking 5 years now. And it must have been the shortest implementation that I've ever heard of. 6 weeks, we did start live 1/1. And what was amazing is it didn't take all this energy and yes, it took a lot of planning, a lot of cleanup from our data, because as Lindy mentioned, we were on 22 instances of QuickBooks. That's how many legal entities we had, plus 3 of Peachtree. And we actually used to hire an intern to go through our chart of accounts every summer to make sure all the names are right so that we could do our consolidations every month, which, as you can imagine, was more painful than it should have been. So the few things we were looking for in a new accounting system was the consolidation of multiple entities and 5 different industries. We have our core HR payroll business. We also have 2 insurance brokerage firms, an EAP, and we also own the building we are in, and we have tenants. And those are different, very, very different industries, different revenue cycles, different practices. Everything's different. And yet there's quite a bit of crossover, and there's clients that we have that overlap, you know, a lot of different services. So we had to be able to slice and dice it in many, many, many different ways. We have authorities that we report to that aren't IRS or the state of Illinois. We're in 45, I think, or 48 different states as far as our clients go, and even Guam. So there's a lot of different stuff we had to keep track of. And, you know, Vijay pointed out, we used to do a lot of the financial data capturing in QuickBooks, but then layer business data on top of it. And one wrong sort or filter, there goes your data, and that's happened to us. You know, when you reach that point where you watch the Excel file download from your server and you just cross your fingers and you hope it does, we no longer really have to do that. When somebody goes out to a client, I can run a report any which way you want. And because we have so many different service areas, we have so many different businesses, depending on who asks, I can tweak a report in 5 minutes. We didn't have an IT department back then, and right now we do, but they don't really touch Intech ever at all. They don't even know what it is. So we have at least 5 different other software packages that we have to integrate with, because as a payroll business, it's quite complex, and we have to manage a lot of different tax tables and other things of that nature. So we had to have a system that would interact with all of those, and none of that manual importing, exporting is going on. A lot of things are just tied to Intech, and we can get things instantly, rerun them, run them, fix something, rerun them again, and have dashboards and print off reports to whoever wants to see them. You know, I quite often use it on my cell phone, actually. People laugh at me, but I do. That's how easy it is to get information out of it. So we've been extremely happy, and we've actually changed a lot of the ways how we interview and recruit for the accounting team nowadays. It's no longer glamorous to type in a bill and know how to code an AP invoice. There's software that does that. It's more being able to analyze. We're looking for a much different skill set nowadays, and accounting's become fun again. So I think that's a lot to attribute to having Intact.
Throwing it out to the audience here. Any questions for our panelists? Yes, Dan.
Hey, Lindy, thanks for everyone's insight. So for those of you that had the luxury of time to look at different options, clearly we've gotten a chance to see Intact, and it's evolved, very functional. But what were the deciding criteria that caused you to pick Intact versus another option? And for those that might be looking at software alternatives, what options did you choose Intact over?
So I can give you my experience, because I've been on Peachtree, I've been on QuickBooks, I've done Lawson, I've done SAP, I've done Oracle. My criteria is purely ease of use. If you remember back in 2000, we had something called ASPs, if that was the right term. No one liked to use them. But mine was more of the ability to integrate into the various components, because at Bluestone we actually had offices in London and Canada, so we had currency issues, so we had to have multi-level transactional currency issues, intercompany. You know, we used to put resources in various projects in different countries, so the ability to have that was critical for us.
We looked at a variety in those settings. The first one, I don't think is as relevant because it was so long ago versus the one at Sim Partners, which was more relevant. Sim was running Salesforce to handle all of its lead gen. These large contracts, we needed something that could also help us do the invoicing. So we did Intech because of its integration with Salesforce and the ease of I've got an inside sales team passing the lead over to the senior salesperson. They sign the contracts are available there and ready to go. Then as soon as that gets a yes, it gets moved into closed one, it immediately kicks over into Intech, and we can generate that first invoice and get that off timely. More importantly, when the renewal comes, and my sales team, as you grow, starts saying a standard 12-month isn't going to do for this customer, I need 13.72 months, or whatever it might be, that automatically happens now. So no forgotten follow-up invoice was really our driver, versus some other ones that have different CRM solutions attached to them, which are great if that's what you have, but we needed that full integration.
We started looking at NetWise, and GP was really the one we looked at versus Intech heavily. NetWise, for some reason, NetSuite just dropped off the radar kind of quickly there. And like I said, we didn't have an IT team, so we couldn't count on getting a report quickly or any upgrade for that matter happening quickly whatsoever. That was a big deciding factor. Having multi-entity with one chart of accounts, GP didn't seem to be able to handle that real well. And so that was the second one. And the third is, we like to look at things simultaneously, and with Intact I can have 16 tabs open looking at different entities, different transactions side by side. Was never able to do that with QuickBooks, and I don't remember that GP was able to let us do that either. So, all things considered, cost of savings on the IT alone helped us make a decision in favor of Intact.
One more thing I should say, the after-purchase experience was so positive, both with Intact and Armanino, at the time that when it came to do the second choice, I was never able to identify someone with the other products that I felt I could rely on. And I don't see a bunch of miscellaneous charges because I called somebody up and said, hey, how do you use this dimension when I do my reporting? It's just a simple phone call. Somebody's typically always available or shortly thereafter, and I get a report done. It's not a big deal.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
How did you take a look at hosting and managed services providers, and what lessons learned would you have there for us?
So having an IT background in building data centers for disaster recovery purposes for large corporations, I looked at Intact as being, because the experience at Bluestone is someone unplugged their server and it blew up, and they're supposed to be an IT firm, right? So, but we won't say anything. For me, it's, being the CFO as well as, responsible for assets, having it in the cloud, backed up, readily available, even if it's a little bit slow sometimes, it's a beautiful thing for me from a risk perspective. So I don't have to worry about it. So I've taken some of that risk and pushed it out. Do you have security issue, data compliance issues? Absolutely, you have to look at that, but that's all part of the process. But I love having it somewhere else.
It was a requirement for Benchmark Capital for Grubhub for us to look at a few different providers, so we did. And then the Intech team, even as late as 2014, when I went down to the conference, their CFO stands up and has a lot to say about risk mitigation and server handling and all of that. So I've had the benefit of having great CTOs on my team that hear what he's saying and get it. I don't have that IT background, but I know that they felt that it was the superior choice.
Having the lack of IT involved, it was statistics on how can we count on the system, and from what we got, it was 99.9% time up, and we've never actually experienced it being down. I'm looking at my accounting manager here. So having it accessible from everywhere, which we can, having it secure, which we can lock down IP addresses for it to be accessed, if you choose to do so, which we do. Security was important, and it was definitely more secure than it would have been in some server box in our basement. So the alternative was, the choice was easy, really.
Great. Tanya, keep that microphone for a second. Why don't you talk about the implementation and going live process, and maybe some of the do's and don'ts, because I know you did a lot of the implementation on your own. So maybe share with our audience here a little bit about the implementation.
Brings back fond memories. You know, we had probably, I want to say, 3 people on our team that, we had a pretty small accounting team, and 3 people were involved, shoulder deep in Intact implementation, on top of their regular day-to-day jobs. So we did implement this while working. We didn't have any special resources allocated to this. Greg and Lindy and Dan from Armanino were really sensitive to how we like to do things in terms of, we're very hands-on and we have trust issues. So we didn't want some other consultant to come in and just do work for us and then kind of leave us there with it and try to figure out what just happened. We like to do work ourselves, and so they guided us through the configuration. They guided us through best practices and how to make some certain decisions given the information we provided them with. But they let us get our own bumps and bruises. So they set us up with a sandbox, which I will recommend to any of you who's going to embark on this, because the loading of the stuff is really easy. It's whether or not it's going to do what you expect it to do. So we loaded a few dozen, thousands of worksite employees that we had, and we decided, you know what, we're not going to use that field. So I could just scratch the sandbox and go back and do it a different way. And all of that took me less than 24 hours to figure out. So if that's how you learn, or if that's how your team learns best, which it ended up helping my team figure out how to really use the tool because they were really involved in setting it up, I do recommend getting a sandbox and rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. And if not, this excellent team will be right there to do, I guess, whatever level of involvement. They'll support you through it every kind of way you want to implement it.
So maybe tell us a little bit about how you cost justified these decisions to the board, and how you made the ROI pitch to them.
Well, that was pretty easy at Grubhub. Grubhub's requirement was to become a public company. QuickBooks doesn't have the necessary controls. So when we had this big deck prepared, and it was multi-page, and it was beautiful glossiness of glossy glory, the benchmark capital guy looks at me like, I don't want to see that. You're either going to do Intact or NetSuite. Now tell me which one you like. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. So that was a lot easier. At Sim Partners, it was a little harder. Revenue growth was key in that SaaS business, and as you know, SaaS takes a lot of capital to get going. And that business was a comparison of, if I don't get this, I need to add a person at this cost structure. And again, startup space is small compared to maybe some of your organizations, but one person at 50, 55, fully loaded, they're kicking up towards 70, versus putting in a system at a fraction of that cost was a pretty easy bet. And here's the recurring cost, and it's when we had recurring costs and go out 3 years, it's a whole lot easier. That and the fact that once you present somebody with erroneous data in the middle of a board meeting, and then you say, I'm sorry, my QuickBooks collapsed instead of Excel, it gets even easier.
Definitely. John, a question for you. Why don't you've been through so many implementations. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the human experience, so the emotional impact of change management and moving to a new system, because you've done this so many times, and give us your perspective there.
Spiders.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, so I also teach and I coach companies from a change management perspective, and I use various tools to see if people are ready for change. Because if I don't know that someone's ready for change, I can't help them. But my approach is pretty simple. I look at it from a value standpoint. If you're teaching someone new skills and new tools that are advanced in the marketplace, if you're teaching them an ERP system like Oracle or SAP, what's their future? you know, if you teach them intact and the ability to integrate, and you know, one of the companies we use, I always forget the tax name, but Avalera, to be able to integrate a tax solution into an accounting system, or we use resource planning. This gives the people the opportunity to create value for themselves, even though it's not with the same company. They may not be there forever, but now they've created value. So I always talk about value they receive and value they give, and it seems to make it easier to do. And the system is pretty intuitive, so that makes it a lot easier as well.
So keeping with our tech-savvy theme, we heard Brian talk a lot about the modern CFO and basically, you know, you better, you know, get modern and get tech-savvy or get out. VJ had some specific examples of how Intact would make your job and your career more tech-savvy. So, you know, we talked about visualization, dashboards, reporting, automation. Any of those come into play, and how did you guys benefit at the organization from automation, visualization, dashboards, and really real-time access to information?
So a couple of things that I want to add a little bit to this too is, you know, I've implemented systems for companies, and they always want you to create every business rule they have. And the thing I love about Intact is it actually puts you in a box, and it makes you figure out what your real core responsibilities and processes are. And from an information standpoint, it's great to be able to look when you're not at the office and look at your PDA and have the data you need, you know, without trying to gather up spreadsheets and so forth. So I love the dashboard features and the immediate feedback time.
So it's been, you know, over 4 years, and we've automated so much that it actually takes me a little time to think about what are the most important things I would like to mention. Well, we're a service business first and foremost, and we do a lot with time coding. Every HR senior that's out there, every salesperson, every accountant that's on the account or doing something with the client codes their time. We +1 for Neil at Nixonia. So we're capturing time at a system that's so seamlessly integrated with Intact, it automatically brings the time over, and Intact automatically calculates the labor burden, which affects client profitability. We'll look at client profitability with a fine-tooth comb across all businesses, all lines of businesses, all service offerings, and I can pull a little bit or a whole lot, you know, 30 seconds, which I used to either have to say no to the owner, you have to wait till the next time I'm doing this report because it takes me 9 hours, or, you know, let me do something quickly, but that's going to take me 9 hours, so I'm not going to do something else for the next 2 days. And now that's just no longer an issue. And, you know, I don't even want to talk about all the imports and exports that we've never been able to do. We run complex tax transactions, we record 400-line commission statements from carriers. All of that is tagged with, you know, 6 different dimensions. So if any point in time I want to look at something, it's no longer combing through those spreadsheets, it's just a click of a button. And if I want to add a field because somebody else wants it, well, it's right there.
I think I had an unfair advantage on this because every person that we hired as part of the interview process at both companies, change and the ability to take something that's very ambiguous and create a structure was a requirement. So in early stage companies, it's a different sort of issue. It's more about rolling back a little of that enthusiasm and getting a process in place that's repeatable. Otherwise, you have people going out and saying, well, I did all this great stuff and it's permanent in the system and here you go. So it was a little different for us, I think, than a lot of people in the audience.
Well, thanks. Those are some good insights. Tossing it out to the audience. Any final questions here? Yes, in the back.
I do have a question. A lot was mentioned about the elimination of subledgers in a B2C business where there is heavy transactional data. Could you speak more to operationally how you eliminated those subledgers? How are you taking that transactional data and operational data and actually coming up with a gap ledger inside of Intact? I think would be really helpful.
Well, there never really were a whole lot of sub-ledgers because we went from QuickBooks, which is basically just, a set of account codes, and then moved into Intact in that manner. Our biggest, when you look at the transaction volume, obviously each individual order coming over is the most frequent transaction. Very little vendor payable relative to that. Payroll was the second biggest set of transactions that were coming over when we did it, but there was never a separate person. In fact, I had one staff, just for perspective, from '07 as the 6th employee till 2010 as about 80 employees. I only had one person. And then we hired a controller, and it was the 3 of us until 2015, and we had 400 total employees. So there was never a sub-ledger mindset. There was no accounts payable person sitting here doing things as a clerk, and then that comes over. In fact, that was one of the problems we were hoping Intech would solve from us from a controls perspective, was to get that separation of duties. So I don't know if I can fully answer your question.
Happens, you book a transaction, you put all the information you want on there, and it's just there. I'm kind of struggling with this the same way you are.
Maybe John.
I guess the ability to drill down to the source of the transaction from an audit perspective, that's what it allows you to do. So it's got that little bit of a QuickBooks function to it, is it allows you to go back to the source. And that's how we were able to get through the audit so fast, is we would drill into the data and we'd be able to go find the source document within minutes. So you don't really need sub-ledgers with it. Sure, you do that, you've still balanced your AR and all that, but it's really not the way the system, it's not intuitive to the system. So.
Can I just add one more? Yes.
Just to add to your quick audit, that was a tremendous change from QuickBooks, because every time we book an invoice or payable or receivable or any general ledger transaction whatsoever, we attach the backup to it. So our auditors have view-only access to it all year long. If they want to start their testing procedures, sampling procedures 3 months in advance, they can do that. So our audits are no longer making copies. We don't have interns making copies anymore. As a matter of fact, we're pretty green. We don't make a lot of copies for any reason now because it's all there. We acquired a business shortly after implementing Intact, and we empowered all the business users and all the account managers to just log in and view their customers' set of bills or their customers' last transactions, because they no longer had to go to this AP person, put a request on their desk to get a copy of the bill so they can go get it to the client and make sure it gets paid. All of that just happens when they're on the phone by logging into Intact.
Great, well, thank you, and,
Actually, I
oh
have
yes,
one
Darren.
other question. So, having the benefit of going through an integration or two, what's something that you guys wish you had known before actually starting the process?
My background with Deloitte, we did a lot of ERP selection for clients, and I worked on the operations side, and you were always constantly convincing people that their way of doing fixed assets wasn't inventing, paper or whatever, and trying to get a change process. With ours, it was more of a education tool to think about training young people, because again, it's a startup, so it's a different mentality. What it means to truly try to think about GAAP and to get things in the right place and to get controls. So I wish I had known a couple of things. Number one, relax a little bit more, because a lot of the accounting is done for you. When you think of SAP and Oracle and the configuration of those big mammoth systems, it's much, much, much huge levels easier than that. It was literally loading up things into an Excel sheet that gets loaded up into the system. So part of it was relax a little bit more, and then to use it as an effective education tool as people came on.
I think one thing, and you and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, one of the things people expect when you put a new system in is it's all working, right? So you have to have patience. And I always say just trust the process and it will work. And these guys have a great process to get it implemented. So trust it and don't expect to have 100% efficiency out of the gate, and you'll do well.
Somebody told me this a couple of years ago, and I'm starting to believe it more and more. Is the one thing I wish we all could remember is that don't be afraid to re-implement Intact, if you will. It's pretty customizable, it's pretty configurable, and your business evolves. You know, we are also an 18-year-old startup. We do things differently every day. If you feel at any point in time that the system's not working the way you expected, that's okay, because it can change. And we oftentimes forget it, and so I think we just need to remind ourselves about it more to be able to not be afraid of this change.
Good points. Question?
It's just a general question in the market. Why would someone go with SAP and Oracle versus Intact? What kind of customers would be attracted to that versus Intact?
I think really large.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm dealing with a client right now that's a $1.4 billion company.
So it's size. And
Yeah, it's mostly
volume.
size.
Volume.
I'm working at a division that's 150 that I'm trying to get Intact into, which is a perfect size, perfect transaction. You know,
I'm sorry, what was the sweet spot again for
it's,
Intact?
the one I'm working in is 150 million, but the
Okay.
parent company is a 1.4 billion, and they're saying they want one business operating system. I don't believe that. I don't believe it anymore. So I think you can expand.
Yeah,
think
Amy
there's-
can talk to that, yeah.
I can speak to that. Grubhub is a $2.2 billion market cap company solely using Intact. They have operations in London and pretty much everywhere in the United States. I believe Canada now. I'm not sure if they've gone to the rest of Western Europe yet or not. When I was there, we did 2 consolidations, bought 2 companies, one the same size as our company, with operations overseas, and then the seamless merger was mammoth, much bigger, and they are solely on Intact.
I think you actually probably will see Oracle and SAP. Worried about things?
Yeah.
They already are.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah,
I
they
ask
definitely
another
are.
follow-up question.
Sure, George.
So I guess what I'm getting, I'm assuming with Intact, things like size, infrastructure is not an issue. So then we're talking about complexity of design, the logical design of the product versus Oracle, and being able to handle complexities. And what I'm hearing, the common theme is that this is so configurable that bring it out, however complex your organization is, bring it out,
Yes.
configure it for you.
It really is configurable. We call it clicks and not scripts. So, and that's what our consultants do. We've got several Armanino consultants in the room today, and that's what we do for companies, is really configure the solution to match your business processes. Yes, Jason?
Oh, hold on one point for the page.
We're sitting on an Oracle database, so that the scalar system.
Right, yeah. So the tool itself has the power, but Intact has put a user interface around it and business rules around it to make it very, very easy for mid-market, fast-growing companies to implement, to stand up very rapidly, as you heard, as fast as 6 weeks, as long as 3 or 4 months. I mean, that's all it really takes to put in an Intact solution. Okay, good point, Jason. Sorry.
Yeah, I've got more of an IT background, so I love hearing more of the, using more of a configuration rather than customization. What I'm curious about is how many integrations have you guys been exposed to as far as is it API? Is it just a file upload? And what's the performance that you've seen on that, if any? Because that's where I get concerned when you start bringing in other partners and other systems. Am I going to be sitting waiting on that type of detail or that type of system performance? That's where I'm at.
Yes, Jason. I'll let the panelists answer, but Intact does have APIs, web services. Rob Reed, the CEO of Intact, I think quotes that 75% or more of the Intact customers use 3 other systems. So there is a heavy, more than half of the total transaction volume of Intact comes from outside systems. So they were built from the ground up by Aaron Harris, the co-founder and CTO of Intact, built from the ground up to be open, to handle the API. So they've been there since day one. Unlike a system like a Great Plains, I happen to have implemented that for 20 years. That was built to be in the 4 walls of that system. So Intact was built to be open. Yeah, hold on, let's see, yeah.
And I think the selection process of your partners is critical because they do, it's nothing but class. So like Nixonia and Avalera, they're companies that work together well and it's seamless. I've never had a problem with it.
Good.
And I've done 3, by the way,
Thanks.
implementations.
Yes, question?
Yeah, so I heard a couple of panelists talk about NetSuite, which I think is, probably you guys would agree is kind of your alternative. What was the reason? It seemed like you guys quickly went away from NetSuite, so I'd ask those folks who looked at NetSuite, why was Intact, did seem to be the better option?
My experience was I felt NetSuite was old and not as flexible, and I'm an entrepreneur but in my heart, and I like small startup, growing quick companies that have a great value prop.
I felt NetSuite was more of a CRM tool turned accounting tool. When I looked at it and looked at the functionality, number one. Number two, we could never get anyone from NetSuite to pay much attention until after we made our decision to purchase Intact, and then they were more than happy to call my board. And then number three, it didn't have the rev rec at the second implementation that we needed to have, which was mandatory.
For us, it was the first one to fall off. I think it had to do with we're a small business, and it just seemed too big for us. Plus, lack of flexibility and configurability the way we needed it. Plus, the requirement for full-time IT staff to be able to move this thing, and we just couldn't deal with that complexity.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Well, we are about out of time. We're 1 minute to the official end of our session here today. I want to thank everyone. Our panelists will be around afterwards at the rooftop for lunch and the game, so feel free to ask any questions. And I do have a very, very small token of appreciation for Armanino. For those of you who know our firm, Matt Armanino, the brother to our managing partner and the son of our founder of our company, and his brother and dad own a winery in Napa. So as a very small token of appreciation, you guys pass it on down. You get some Armanino wine, which you guys have already had. This is Wine Spectator, usually in the mid-90s. So it's very, very great wine. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.